afternoon, and welcome to part three of the Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell story and trials. I'm here with Anna, and today we are going to discuss the trials of both of them. So, thank you very much for joining me. Before I get started, I'd like to warn the audience that this is some sensitive topic, so may not be suitable for all listeners. So, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me one more time. This should wrap up the Idaho portion of the saga, and maybe if all goes to plan later in the year, we can circle back around and talk about Lori's Arizona trial. But for now, let's finish up with Idaho and getting justice for JJ, Tylee, and Tammy.
Okay, before we get started, can you go ahead and give the 2 minute review of how we got here?
So how we got here is Lori and Chad met in October of 2018. They were both still married to other people at the time, children, families, all of that. And it was like fire and gasoline, and a horrific, tragic implosion of lives happened because of it in a very short period of time. They both kind of fed each other's religious fanaticism. They excused each other's bastardization of the Mormon religion. And it just kind of snowballed. They brought other people in who were believing what they were doing. And as a result, they decided between the two of us that they had people in their lives that were a burden. And those people were Lori's two younger children, Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow, and Chad's current wife, Tammy Daybell. And at the end of it, those three were dead within 2 months of each other. Charles Vallow was also a roadblock for them. He died a few months before the kids did. But we haven't got justice for Charles yet, so we'll focus more on him when Lori's trial for that rolls around. So we're caught up to the trial at this point.
Okay, thank you for the summary. Let's quickly discuss. I think you had brought it up at one time, but just to clarify again, why their trials were separated and why they weren't like tried together.
So originally, that was the plan, to try them together. And John Pryor, who was Chad's lawyer, was the one that was fighting all along to sever them. But he wasn't really gaining any ground. But there was some late discovered evidence, DNA type evidence, that came up in March of 2023. And Lori refused to give up her right for a speedy trial. And so at that hearing about that, the Judge Stephen Boyce, he ruled that she can't face the death penalty because there's not enough time for her defense team to examine the new evidence. And because she won't give up her right to a speedy trial. That's his, concession. Chad's lawyer argued that they wanted more time. They asked for a continuance to have the evidence looked at. And so the result was that Judge Boyce severed the trials, took the death penalty off the table for Lori, and gave Chad more time to work on his defense.
And not to spoil things, that probably didn't work out for him because he did not. We'll talk about it later, but he did end up getting the death penalty.
He did.
Okay, so to cover these trials, let's just go over what was like common between them, and then we can go out if there was any differences between them to talk about it. But we'll start with Lori, like kind of start with Lori's.
Well, I mean, the common thread between both was just really that the state of Idaho proved in both cases that although it was wrapped up in the package of religion, their kind of tagline that they used opening and closing in both trials was money, sex, and power. That all they were really worried about trying to get for the two of them, for Chad and Lori, was money sex between the two of them, their relationship, and power over the people that they were convincing to believe the way that they were. So a lot of the same faces showed up in both trials. Um, a lot of the same people I've already mentioned in the previous two episodes that we did. Probably the key witness against Lori, um, more so than Chad, although she was very important in Chad's trial, was Melanie Gibb. Melanie was one of Lori's closest friends and a confidant. And Melanie was the one that Lori tried to get to lie to the police when they were looking for JJ. And she did. But then she came back around and decided to cooperate with the police and really kind of started helping build those building blocks for the case against Lori.
Not to
Um,
go too much down, did she get in trouble? Did she get any charges against her, or did she get any deals for helping out?
she has never been charged, and the prosecution, says they believe that she did not have any, culpability in the crimes that they were on trial for. Yes, she lied to the police, and she admitted that she lied to the police, but then she came clean and, cooperated, and so they never pursued charges against her for that.
Okay.
The next person that I'm going to mention does have immunity, but nobody really knows what the immunity is about. So Zulema Pastinis, one of the players I've already mentioned, was also very damning for Lori, but also exceptionally damning in Chad's trial. And Melanie kind of always was willing to believe, but questioned everything. She was very skeptical. I think she's just naturally a skeptical person. Zulema came across to me as just wanting to believe everything that she was being told. Um, and so, um, like, Chad and Lori would give them their teachings, and Zulema would take notes and draw little diagrams on what the levels of ascension were, and what you had to do to be an exalted being, um, and how the light and dark scales worked, and the zombies, and the being possessed by demons, and Zulema, she came with receipts, to use the common term, and so both of those people were really able to, through their testimony, it allowed the state of Idaho to really show the manipulation of Chad and Lori on the people in their lives, as well as the way that the two manipulated each other. Um, Lori's son testified in her trial against her and about his siblings, and that was exceptionally heartbreaking. Um, and then the main detective slash investigator in Idaho for this whole case, his name was Ray Hermosillo. He was the one that responded to the welfare call for JJ in November of 2019. And he really saw it through to the end, and he testified heavily in both trials. Um, and he could testify to every aspect of it because he just stayed on top of it and he was involved in all of it. And so he was really kind of the hero of the day.
And what did he kind of testify to, I guess?
Just how they kind of followed the breadcrumbs of what they were finding out, and just really kind of put it all together. Like, they have a welfare call for the missing boy, and then before that they had gotten a call from Arizona about a missing Jeep that they thought was involved in a crime. This was the attempt on Brandon Boudreaux's life in October. And then, they get the welfare call request for JJ, and it's the same people that had this Jeep, and they're like, hey, we were looking at this, a month ago, and there was no kids, and there's still no kids. And, really like realizing that there's supposed to be two kids. The missing child right now is just JJ, but there is a daughter, and nobody has seen her either. And then just, really following the breadcrumbs, like I said, like tying it all together, finding out who the players are with Melanie Gibb and Zulema Pastinitz and Alex Cox, and getting their cell phone data, getting their Google account data, and pouring through this monument of data to pick out the pieces that were important, that was just another nail in the coffin. And Ray Hermosillo was able to do that in a way that was really easy to follow and understand. He explained it well, and so I think that he should definitely wear these convictions as a badge of honor, because he worked his tail off to make sure that they happened.
Okay. I guess, and then in the Lori case, can you explain what what did she try for a defense?
She didn't.
Okay.
It was the craziest thing. So just to give a few details here, her jury selection for her trial began on April 3rd of 2023. That's literally a month after she found out she was no longer going to face the death penalty. Opening statements were given on April 10th, and on May 11th of 2023, deliberations began. In both trials, there were some days that were shorter than others. I think that in both trials, they might have had a couple of days where they didn't have court. But these trials were a slog of a full day of testimony. The arguments outside of the presence of the jury were not as voluminous as we've seen in some trials.
Yeah.
So it was a solid month of work days for these jurors. On May 12th, Lori was found guilty on all counts. It was 2 technical days of deliberation, but really closer to, a day total. They weren't going for 24 hours a day. Because the death penalty was not on the table, the sentencing works a little different in Idaho. It takes about 3 months, 90 days to get all of the information that the judge needs to see to decide on what the sentence is. So on July 31st of 2023, Lori was sentenced to 5 life sentences.
Concurrent or consecutive?
I don't recall. I think that they are concurrent.
So that really means one. Like that really could only mean one.
It could, but I mean, if she has filed an appeal, and if she succeeds on the appeal, I think that she won't succeed on the appeal. Let me just say that. But then there were some other, and I didn't write down this information. There were some other lesser charges, grand theft, etc., that she was also convicted on. So even if she's overturned on either the murder or the conspiracy to murder charges, she'll still spend the rest of her life in jail, and she's still facing more charges. So, she has no hope of ever getting out.
Well, okay, so let's switch over to Chad's trial. And the one thing that I heard, and when I listened to it, they had some jailhouse calls. Can you talk about those?
They did, and they came in a little bit in Lori's trial, but they really came in Chad's trial. Chad and Lori talked all of the time. One of the more compelling ones, in my opinion, is the day that they were executing the search warrant on Chad's property. Chad called Lori while sitting in the car in his driveway. And he's like, they're searching the property. And Lori says, they're searching the house. And he says, no, the property. And just maybe it's because we know what they found there, but just the weight of using those words, but not saying the quiet part out loud. It's just like, he knows. And then towards the end of the trial, they did play some recordings of when Lori was in jail before Chad was arrested. And it was really to show how they manipulated each other. But Lori asks him something along the lines of, is there a plan? Did we do all this for a reason? And the inference that you can make from the way she's talking around it is, did we kill my kids for no reason at all?
It just shocks my mind how you get two people to decide to kill kids in that scenario. But
It's insane.
religion can do some weird things, and I guess even love, but I don't know. So
And
maybe there'll be books written. Maybe they'll start talking in jail or prison and just go over what they were thinking while they were doing these things.
maybe, and I think one of the harder things for people to understand in this particular one, and it's similar to Murdaugh, how people were trying to say that in the Alex Murdaugh case, that yeah, a man might kill his wife, but a man would never shoot his son or kill his son. And it's just like this in here. Like, Lori, by all accounts, was a wonderful, dedicated, loving mother. And nobody can square that with the person who murdered her two children. And Chad was supposedly a really great dad and had a really, tight bond with his kids. And nobody can square that with the man that, would condone the murder of children and also murder his children's mother. And so it's just one of those things that people are complex, man. So back to Chad's trial. Like I said, a lot of the same evidence, a lot of the same testimony. There was a lot more brought in about Tammy in this trial. Although Lori was convicted of conspiracy to murder Tammy, Chad was really kind of painted as her murderer. He got convicted for conspiracy as well, but there was a lot more about Tammy and how she was healthy and vibrant, and she took clagging classes and she took Zumba classes and she was training for a marathon. And, there was really no reason for this healthy 50-something-year-old woman to just die in her sleep.
And what did they find the cause of death? Like, what did they determine the cause of death again?
It was determined to be asphyxiation.
Okay.
They kind of laid out a theory without stating a theory that Chad and possibly Alex essentially held her down and smothered her. There were no marks on her neck. There were marks on her arms and her rib area, bruises. And so the way that they described it in my head, I was imagining it was probably like a pillow over the face. Okay. So lots more testimony about Tammy and Chad's trial, which was heartbreaking in its own way because they did a really good job of bringing Tammy to life through the different people that they brought in to testify to different aspects. Chad's attorney, so Lori had two attorneys. She had Jim Archibald and John Thomas. And I really think that part of the reason that she didn't have a great defense is because she wouldn't let them defend her. She would not let them imply in any way, shape, or form that she was mentally ill or mentally unstable. She would not let them throw Chad under the bus, really, in the way that they needed to keep her out of prison. Um, John Pryor and Chad Daybell did not have the same compunctions. They would have stood in front of Jesus Christ and blamed him to his face if they thought they could get away with it. Um, so, the counterpoint to the Tammy being young and healthy and vibrant and having everything to live for was that she was old and fat and slowing down and had health issues and refused to go to the doctor and tried to treat everything with essential oils and herbal medicines and naturopathic remedies. Um, and it was really disgusting to me personally, the way that they really painted Tammy in this. And it was just a very stark contrast to the people that truly loved her, um, and the way they talked about her. Um, Melanie Gibb was important again in Chad's trial. I think that Zulima's testimony in Chad's trial might have been a little more impactful, just because Melanie had more interaction with Lori, whereas Zulima, um, she really could speak a lot more to the teachings that Chad was doing. Ray Hermosillo, once again, was a big deal. In the way that he could lay it all out and put it all together. And the state just really had a solid case in both of them. They did have a little bit harder time in Chad's trial because John Pryor did put up a vigorous defense. One of the most humorous parts of Chad's trial, there was and I can't remember the guy's name, but there was a friend of Chad's who was a real estate agent, and had consulted with Chad on, maybe purchasing some properties in the area, or, maybe subdividing Chad's land and bringing in like a mobile home. And the thing to know here is that as part of paying for John Pryor to defend him, because he was not a public defender, he was a privately retained lawyer, Chad signed over the deed to his home to John Pryor. And so this real estate agent is asked a question. I believe it was on like either the square footage of the house or like the size of the property. And the guy pops off to John and says, "Well, you own it. You tell me."
Okay.
It was so funny. Of course, that was stricken, and the jury were told to, ignore that or whatever. But that was a really fun moment of levity in the trial. I think the most impactful witnesses in Chad's trial, and I'm not saying that impactful is good or bad, because it really depends on how you look at it, but it was his children. So the state laid out their case. I really think they proved their case. The jury verdict also kind of says that. And it was the defense's turn. And like I said, the defense really focused on Chad didn't kill Tammy, more so than defending him against the murders of the kids. They did try to basically say, that they couldn't prove that it was actually Chad, that they couldn't prove that Chad actually knew the kids were there. But it was really more Tammy focused in their defense. And as part of that, 2 of Chad's children testified. His daughter, Emma, is either knowingly lying for her father or is completely brainwashed by him. It was painful to watch her testimony, and the things that she was willingly saying about her mother, and just the absolute devotion to her father, who is sitting across the courtroom accused of heinous murders. And she stood strong in her belief that her father was not a killer. So I'll give her that. But she seemed very robotic. She seemed very, very flat affect. in a lot of things. Um, and it had already come out in the defense, or in the state's part of the trial, but the day that Chad was arrested, the day that they found the children on his property, Chad was placed in the back of a police car. Um, and the camera that covers the cage was on. I don't know if this is just something that I think I know or if it was testified to, but I believe if you have somebody in the back part, you have to have the camera on, or it might like automatically be triggered to come on. If, I don't know, but the camera recorded their whole conversation. And Chad told her in that conversation, "I'm not coming back." So Chad knew at the time, and Emma knew at the time, that he was going away for the rest of his life. Um, and then his son Garth also testified. And what, the kind of like bombshell that we found out then is that when Garth was called to testify before the grand jury that indicted Chad, he said some things that the grand jury didn't like. So they requested to have him come back to be examined about perjury.
Wow.
Yeah. Um, and then the state, because there was actually a defense put on, the state got rebuttal. And Garth, because it was October when Tammy passed away, Garth had traditionally for several years worked at a haunted house in the area. And so one of his friends slash coworkers at the haunted house, whose name I probably will butcher, but I think it's McKay Abaglin, was brought in to testify. And so the weekend after Tammy died, Garth was back at the haunted house, and McKay said, "Hey man, I'm sorry to hear about your mom." And Garth, as people do, shared a little bit of details. And Garth said to McKay, "I walked in from work and saw her dead on the couch." But the story, once the police were called, was that Chad and Tammy were asleep in their bedroom when Garth got home. And it wasn't until the morning when Chad yelled for Garth because he'd found Tammy dead that he knew. And so I think you could put two and two together. And honestly, who knows? Who knows if Garth had a part of it, regardless of whether they physically or knowingly, had a part in it or knowingly covered up any of it. I think that if Chad's kids don't know, they're lying to themselves. It's hard to square reason and logic into their denial of all of this. So Chad's trial started on April 1st with opening statements beginning on April 10th, which was just really weird that it was almost a year to the day of the trial starting for the two of them. And the opening statements actually began on the same day, a year apart.
That is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is kind of confusing because I was a little confused when you said April. Realized that hers had been a year before.
Yeah. And then on May 30th, Chad was found guilty on all counts with less than a full day of deliberations. So they ended the day before. They deliberated for a little while. The jurors, came back in the morning, and I believe it was around 2 p.m. the next day. They found him guilty. And so then they went back into the deliberation room because now it was the sentencing part of it. In Idaho, if the prosecutors are seeking the death penalty, then you have to be sentenced to death by a jury of your peers. And so the very next day, on June 1st, Chad was sentenced to death after about 6 hours of deliberations.
Yeah. I remember that. Okay, so as of right now, we're waiting for Lori has an appeal. You said that she's appealing something.
Lori is appealing her convictions in Idaho. Um, there's, I think, 16 different points on her appeal motion. I didn't go in and detail them. It's a lot of it is boilerplate. All of the reasons that anybody appeals anything, and she has been extradited to Arizona. I think she's been through a couple of lawyers. There were some motions hearings this week, actually. Her lawyer is arguing against cameras in the courtroom, and I don't know if the judges ruled on that or not. Um, and arguing for Lori to be allowed to wear regular clothes or street clothes instead of prison garb during her trial.
Okay.
So no no word on a trial date yet. I think it was slated to happen before the end of the year, but I don't know if that's going to happen.
Okay, and anything on Chad? He's as he said, he's going to
Chad
appeal
has
anything.
appealed as well. John Pryor has, he filed the appeal, and then he filed the paperwork to have Chad's case transferred to a public defender type appeals attorney. John, just within the last month or so, has listed that home that we talked about a little while ago for sale, which I don't think surprises anyone. Um, and so Chad's just waiting on an appeal. I mean, he automatically got the appeal
Yeah.
because it's a death penalty. Um, but also, John has filed it. Basically, I believe he was saying that um, the prosecutor um, misrepresented some stuff, and that the judge made some wrong calls, some calls that could be refuted with the law. So I don't think either of them have much chance of getting appeal, but we could definitely come back around if they do win some small ground on that.
Okay. Yeah. Or and once we get close to Lori's trial, we'll meet again. But
Yeah,
we'll meet for other things.
yeah.
So
Well, and I
thank
think
you. Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say I think we can maybe do um, at minimum 2 episodes, maybe just hear just the facts that Lori is having to answer for in Arizona, and then we can come back around afterwards. Or I know you like to do recaps of trials, so if timing works out when she finally goes to trial, maybe we do a little short episode every day.
Okay, that sounds good. So thank you
Awesome.
very much for meeting or letting me know about this case. I only knew a little bit about it, and now I know a whole lot more, and
It's
hopefully our audience does too. So
and there's so much more to find out. So just Google it. If you want to know more, if you're like, this is insane, how can this happen? Just dive down the rabbit hole because there's
was
so much more.
was there a Netflix documentary on it too,
Um,
or something, or
there was there's been a couple. Excuse me. I think one of them is called Sin of Our Mother or Sins of Our Mother. I could be conflating that with a completely different case, but there have been a couple of shows that came out before the trials about the case leading up to it and all of that. Um, and it's just like most true crime documentaries. There's good facts, there's bad facts, there's bias, but if you know the basics, and I'm not going to pretend that I didn't have bias telling all of this because I think they're crazy
okay,
and guilty. But yeah, I mean, the facts, you can find more facts and then you can watch them and take what you want from it.
okay. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and enjoy your the baseball game tonight. And can you hang out for 1 second?